Hi, I'm Quinn Benson. I'm a senior economics and political science student here at Davidson College. Lucky enough to be a Chidsey Leadership Fellow, recipient of the leadership grant this past summer, where I worked at Citibank in New York on their private placements, investment grade private credit team. So my responsibilities while at Citi were a lot to do with making sure I was on track of what the markets were doing, updating our data sets, which is really hard for private markets because a lot of our deals are private inherently, and then making sure that we were in line, whether it be through making pitch decks or pricing up debt. I really got to do a full suite of opportunities during my time there because I was in a small group, a small setting like here at Davidson College, where I really learned to excel. The prior thoughts that I had about leadership before Chidsey, before this grant opportunity, is that leadership moves fast. It's someone taking charge, taking hold, and making an executive decision. What I quickly learned in my role at Citi was that this was nothing like how the actual world worked, especially in an environment where you would think we're so fast-paced. A lot of the decisions mandated that we made thoughtful ones, but that a group was involved in that process. I think back to one experience that I had with an MD who wanted to work on an opportunity that had just come up. The corporation that we were working with wanted to get the deal done quickly, but he said explicitly not to rush it. This decision to take on the opportunity was made quickly, but the thoughts thereafter had to be developed in a team setting. This sort of team setting and collaboration, which we build here at Davidson College in the Chidsey Leadership Program, I think is critical to how we can operate on a broader scale. So how has an experience in a corporate culture like banking changed the way that I view society, how I want to impact it? I think it's easy to say that I need to create shareholder value because that's my job. I think the harder thing to say and distinguish is something that was on full display today to me at the American Bankers Association conference in Charlotte, which I was lucky enough to go to, part of the reason why I'm thankful for this organization. And that's that we are a critical function to expanding opportunity for everyone. In a bank, we often think about it as a one-for-one transaction, but in debt lending specifically, what we do creates opportunity for many people to get hired, for new developments and infrastructure to be had, and doing that thoughtfully in a correct manner, we have regard for all of the exterior options is critical. I think back to one experience that I had at Citi this summer where I worked on an affordable housing program. We raised debt up to $80 million for an affordable housing program in the state, and more specifically the city of New York. That program may not have developed the most profitability for our clients or for our corporation as a whole, but it was crucial to understanding how we can impact the people around us in that New York City area, and proves that even a bulge bracket bank like Citi needs to be in touch with a broader society.
Hi, my name is Ray Blythus. This summer I was fortunate enough to work with the Amplify Minnesota, a disability justice organization, as a summer intern, and my summer immersion grant with them was to research the impact on food on grassroots organizations. As a summer intern with them, I did a lot of projects, but one of my main projects was researching the impact of food on grassroots organizations. So for the first week, it really took place over 4 weeks. So the first week, I spent my own time independently researching the impacts of food on grassroots organizations. And then the second week, I took courses locally in Minnesota. And then over the third and fourth week, I was fortunate enough to use a majority of my immersion grant funding to go to London and Paris to take baking courses at Le Cordon Bleu. And I got to take a wide variety of courses and learn from a bunch of different chefs. And then I took that information back home with me to Minnesota. These experiences really showed me that so much of leadership is learning how to read the room and learning how to kind of meet the needs of the people who are there, and learning the knowledge that you have and finding the best ways to communicate it down to them. I look back at the various chefs I got to work with, and each one of them had a different leadership style, but what I really valued was each one of them was able to relate it back to the people in the room and make sure that we all were able to understand these really detailed steps in a very digestible way. I was my third course, and it was in London, but we had a French chef coming to teach us how to make all these different macarons, and it was a very difficult thing. He had us learn how to do it by hand so we could really get a feel for that egg beating and stuff. But this man had spent his whole life learning how to make all this stuff, but he truly made it such a fun and enjoyable process, cracking jokes, but also broke down the science behind why we were beating it the certain way, why we had to we couldn't stop beating the eggs once we added the sugar and stuff. He gave us illustrations of how the science behind it worked and really took the time to explain it with us, understanding that we were here just for a fun, informative experience, but we weren't here to be full experts on this, even though he was. And that just he met us where we were, and you could truly tell he was so passionate about this and had so much knowledge, but wasn't cocky about it, was really, really down to earth and wanted us to learn the best way we could. This really reminded me of just the importance of leadership within community. I really am interested in continuing grassroots organization and grassroots building. So I really want to be able to learn how to read my community and meet them where they are. I think so much of that is advocating with my community rather than for them. So this experience really reminded me of the importance of learning how to meet people where they are and how to really connect with them at their own level.
My name is Joseph Duboulay, and for my research grant, I did an independent research project on the Duluth and Great Lakes shipping. So the title of my project was Duluth Resilience, the Past, Present, and Future of Great Lakes Shipping. And this took place in Duluth, Minnesota, which is about 4 hours north of the Twin Cities. Some of my responsibilities included, first and foremost, research, obviously, and this was broken down into a few components. So first, I had to find the relevant literature and make a literature review. And then second, I had to interpret data and policies to see how Duluth changed and what worked for them. And then finally, I was also in the field in Duluth talking to people, including civilians and experts, to really experience the legacy of shipping on the ground and how the people in the city actually felt. Before the immersion experience, I always pictured leadership in the context of a group where I would use my skills and strengths to enhance a group and make people more than the sum of their parts. And when I went on my immersion experience, I realized that this was an independent research project and I didn't have a group. And so I had to be conscious about how I'm gonna lead from where I am and choose connection when it's just me. And choosing connection was a really important part of my research because I had to interact with people on the ground in Duluth and experts, and it made me realize that and understand that leadership is learning from others and being able to connect with people, whether it be experts that you've intentionally tried to work with or people you meet spontaneously on the street. And I realized that leadership was being able to make connections with anyone. Growing up, I've always loved the city of Duluth, and it was really powerful to see how Duluth really escaped the fate of a lot of Rust Belt cities that were built on shipping. And seeing that made me realize that whether it's on an urban scale or an international scale, domestic, international, it doesn't matter. I really, really care about seeing why places develop and grow how they do, and then seeing what strategies work, what don't, and see if I can, help people or places that way.
My full name is Ellie Heald, and this summer I worked at a company called Children's Health Hospital in Dallas, Texas, and my title of my position was a communications and marketing intern, and responsibilities for this included managing and editing and updating all of their health and wellness articles, creating and sending out a bi-weekly newsletter, and creating, editing, and working with subject matter experts on podcasts that went out from week to week. Along with this, I also took classes in HR through SHRM and college counseling through NACAC, where my main responsibilities were simply to attend these virtual classes, webinars, and engage in some of the outside of class activities. Something that was really critical to me about leadership prior to this experience was my understanding of leading from where you are, and knowing that leadership doesn't always necessarily mean being the loudest voice in the room or being at the front of the room. Rather, it can be how you lead through your actions or things like that. And so that was something that was really critical for me coming into this experience. Over the course of the summer, I was able to continue to see that leading doesn't have to necessarily mean being the loudest voice at the front of the room, But something that changed for me was my understanding of leadership as an individual action versus as something that can be taken on as an organization as a whole. An example that shifted my understanding of this type of leadership was that although my individual action as an intern through maybe editing a website or things like that didn't always necessarily fit what my prototype had been of individual leadership beforehand, through working with a company and organization whose mission I was extremely passionate about, and I saw that they were all passionate about their mission as well, I was able to indirectly impact way more people than I would have been able to on my own. And so I think this understanding of being able to work together as an organization and use small efforts of leadership together as a collective whole to impact a greater good was important in my understanding and learning. Something that this experience has taught me is that working with an organization that's not only mission driven but has a mission that I personally am extremely passionate about is a non-negotiable for me going forward. And I think just knowing that working together with a group of people can be extremely impactful is something, especially in today's world, that I would like to continue thinking about going forward.
Hi, my name is Ursha Hassan, and I used my immersion grant for our BCG Bright House summer immersion experience in Atlanta, Georgia, where I worked as a strategy intern for Boston Consulting Group subsidiary company Bright House. Because Bright House is a purpose-driven consulting firm, a lot of my work entailed excavating purpose for clients and Fortune 500 businesses. So I spent my first week working with an orchestra in London doing a vision project where we excavated vision lines for this orchestra that was celebrating their 100th anniversary. A lot of my work also included synthesizing information from stakeholder interviews, whether that be clients or within the business. Coming into my internship, I knew leadership wasn't about being the loudest voice in the room, but seeing that in practice was inspirational because I was sitting in rooms full of these C-suite executives with managing directors and senior managers from all around the world coming in via Zoom, and just realizing that their leadership style wasn't about projecting their voice necessarily and speaking over others, but being very collaborative, being very inviting, being very thoughtful and efficient about the words that they were using rather than being sort of a powerful voice encompassing everything in the room. I feel like one misconception I had about leadership is how meticulously you have to have everything planned, and while there is some truth in that, there is some truth in the fact that you have to have some sort of a plan as a leader. I think I learned that a lot of leadership comes from being able to effectively think on your feet, and I saw this come into action while I was working at Bright House this summer, where I mentioned I was put on a vision sprint my first 2 weeks of the internship, and this is a process that typically takes 6 to 8 weeks, but it was very much sped up, and I had to adapt to the quick environment and learn things along the way. So just learning how to efficiently think on the spot was really impactful. At Bright House, we have a saying that we focus on ROI, but the ROI is return on inspiration before it is return on investment. So this summer made me realize that I don't really have to pick between working in corporate and also making an impactful, positive difference in the world. I want to work in strategy consulting that's purpose-driven, and I want to make a positive impact through companies that have all this power but are using it in a meaningful way.
Hi everyone, my name is Valeria Krushkova and I am a senior at Davidson College, double major in economics and political science. And this summer I was a summer analyst at Bank of America in New York in a corporate banking division. My responsibilities included analyzing financial statements of the clients and also finalizing the credit memos for their future transactions. Before this experience, I viewed leadership as decisiveness, but this internship redefined leadership as strategic coordination under the uncertainty. And Bank of America, the best leaders were not the loudest in the room. They were the ones who connected the people across the teams to help clients with their needs seamlessly. Leadership for me was about proactiveness and making decisions. But at Bank of America, I realized that leadership is also about people. If you have connections and you know how to communicate in a very concise way, leadership helps you build connections and also provide a solid foundation for your career in the future. During my immersion experience at Bank of America this summer, I realized that life is about balance, but not having balance in the moment, but achieving that throughout your proactiveness. This experience gave me the understanding that I can be a mentor for the young generation who wants to apply to finance positions or internships during their summers. And I have abilities and strong foundation to provide and give feedback on their resumes, and also give advice on how to have coffee chats or Zoom chats or meeting with people and asking for help.
I am Liam McDonough, current senior Chidsey Fellow. As far as name of my program, I think my program is more named by myself because it was a less formal program. I kind of created the program within a program, so I called it Education in Divided Societies. And what I did with the Immersion grant this summer is I was able to travel to Belfast, and with my grant, I was able to both pay rent and live in Belfast for a month. And during that month, I studied the education system there. And that education system serves as an interesting example of education in divided societies because of the Protestant and Catholic divide within that area. And so I guess what the grant allowed me to do during that month period was visit several schools. I also was able to talk to kids outside of schools, as well as some professors at Queen's and Ulster University, just to get a feel for how that society is making sense of division and inequities in their system. Before using my immersion grant, the way that I understood leadership was like an Italian race car driver. And I say that because the way I understood leadership is that a leader always is the catalyst for change and never has an eye towards the rear. Essentially, that leaders should always be pushing the movement forward and should not be so concerned with kind of what might be in the rearview mirror or what might be behind them. And what I think this immersion process forced me to consider is that a leader is someone who, yes, always has an eye towards change and the inevitability of, certain improvements, but also has an eye in the rearview mirror. Belfast and Northern Ireland as a whole is an area with a lot of historical baggage, and I found during my time there that the best principals, the best leaders, the best elected officials were those who understood that change needed to be made in the area. So yes, they have kind of an eye out the front windshield, but also are occasionally looking up at the rearview mirror to understand that the historical baggage and the violence and the separations between communities are always going to shape the outcomes and feelings associated with policy change. And so refusing not to look in the rearview mirror every once in a while is a leadership failure. And so I think that's probably my biggest takeaway from my experience is that a catalyst for change is an important component of leadership, but empathy and cultural awareness are equally as important. Impacting society is a really scary idea because I feel like I'm getting to the age where I am, going to be a change maker in some regard, and I'm not sure if I have all the answers. But one thing that I took away from my time in Belfast is the importance of equality of opportunity. I think it was really jarring to see the different outcomes that students were facing depending on not only the primary school that they were attending, but also the neighborhoods they lived in, what jobs their parents had, how much time their parents had to commit to their education. And so if I had one kind of big picture goal as a leader, it would be to create and foster that idea of equality and opportunity. I think I can get more into the weeds on what it looks like in Belfast, but I think generally what that looks like is like less high stakes testing, and more resources for underprivileged communities. But my bigger, kind of more applicable takeaway is that we need to make opportunities more equal.
My name is Taylor McKibben. I was a development intern for Northwood office in Charlotte, North Carolina this summer. My responsibilities included conducting punch walks, reviews, and acceptance walks for over 100 Class A multifamily units. I also did some Excel work, but overall I just was able to fully immerse myself and gain so much exposure in commercial real estate development. Critical components to my prior thoughts on leadership were that leaders were the most visible person in the room. They were the most assertive. They made essential critical decisions, especially in real estate. They made hard, tough decisions that directly affected stakeholders, investors. They were basically just the most important people in charge. In terms of what is similar, I definitely think that leaders need to be decisive and assertive in situations. They need to command the room when necessary, but I definitely think that empowerment is an underappreciated value in leaders. And my boss exemplified that perfectly this summer, but I think that it seems simple that you would want to follow a leader that you feel cares about you and cares about your work. But I think that it is certainly something that I have given more thought this summer. Something that shifted my understanding of leadership during my immersion experience was watching my boss empower me in front of his superiors. In some work meetings, he would make sure to tell them everything I had done, even if he was inflating my accomplishments a bit. He made me feel so confident and so capable that it empowered me to do more and try for more after that. This experience has influenced the way I want to impact society by really highlighting how important equity and inclusion is to me. I want to create spaces where I can empower other people to be leaders and to be successful leaders and to feel as though they have the space and capacity to do so.
Hello, my name is Stacy Miruka, and over the summer I decided to do a volunteer service at Imani Care Foundation in Narok, Kenya. During my time in Imani, I was in charge of the daily care routines, which involved cooking for the children, cleaning their spaces, and also cleaning their clothing every day and preparing them to go to school and helping them to transition back home. I was also in charge of doing mentoring and tutoring at the end of their day at school, and I also helped them in transitioning through their faith-based organization courses and programs. I was also in charge of outreach missions where we went into communities and villages outside and we talked to widows and their children while providing hygiene, products and food, and also helping them transition and giving them things that will enable them to go about their daily lives. Prior to my experience at Imani, I thought of leadership as being in charge, guiding others, and taking initiative of all the goals that were present in the organization. The critical components of how I previously understood leadership was responsibility and initiative, but now I see responsibility and initiative as a way to also include humility, faith, and love for people. While serving, it is very important to ensure that you help people find hope and dignity in every single thing that they do as part of your leadership experience. During my time working at Imani, I had the chance to work with widows, and the one thing that struck me is even though they had less and were not necessarily privileged to have a lot, whenever they received, they were willing to give. And that changed my perception in that I now consider generosity and the need to care for others as a really huge component of leadership. This experience shaped how I want to impact community. I can now lead with compassion and more care towards those I choose to serve in the future in my medicine career. I am also more inclined to ensuring that I meet the community-based needs of the people I serve while incorporating their dignity and the love they want to feel. I am also more inclined to ensure that I provide hope to those I serve.
Hello, my name is Petronila or Petra, and my Immersion project title is Bumini Scouts Empowerment Initiative. It was a collaboration with my primary school, which is St. Luke's Bumini Primary and Junior School. It's located in a town called Mumias in Western Kenya. My responsibilities included, first of all, designing the whole project, recruiting potential volunteers. I also partnered with the Starehe Ekia Rover Crew, which is another World Scouting chapter located in Nairobi, and it consists of mainly alumni from my high school. So basically recruiting some of the members to help with the project, and then designing lessons that students were to be taught in, and that varied from life skills or practical skills, some sustainable agricultural practices, and then the World Scouting movement principles, and then just creating a schedule for how each and every day would look like. Some of the critical components of my prior thoughts of what leadership is more of wanting to do stuff on my own, especially if I'm leading a project, just wanting to design everything on my own and presenting the final idea to people. And that also kind of ties to my two strengths, which is ideator and arranger. I love to have everything in order according to my own taste and what I want them to look like. The biggest change I've had, especially from this experience, is the idea of leadership. It's not about you designing something, but it is about who are you working with and how are you influencing people along the way. And as I said, I wanted to design this all on my own because the idea was originally mine, and I knew what I wanted it to look like. But this project involved working with a community, and it's my own community, so of course I had an idea, but I haven't lived in that community for almost 10 years now. And so building it based on my own thoughts and ideas kind of did not mess up, but had some challenges. My community expected some things that I had not included in the budget, and they didn't seem important to me. An example I would give is t-shirts. So to my community members, any project that has been done in that community has involved some kind of identity or just some recognition, and it always involves t-shirts. You'll see people walk around with branded t-shirts, and I didn't think about that in my project. So when I got home and I had some community members involved in the project and they were all asking for t-shirts, I got kind of surprised. But then starting to reflect and talking to my peers who are also volunteering on the project, I came to realize that t-shirts is just not a piece of clothing for these people. It's they're a form of creating awareness or recognition that they've done something. So there is that. Basically, I should have started working with everyone when I was developing the project. This experience, I honestly lack words to say it, but I guess one of the ways I can describe it is on the last day of the project, I cried so much, and it was just so much of my reflection on what I had done. When I was doing the project, if I'm being honest, I really didn't think of the huge impact. I was just thinking of getting the kids to learn something and have them have fun, connect with the community. But then when the teachers and the community members were reflecting on that and saying that no alumni has ever come back to do this, and then I also just remembered when I was going to school, we never had something like that. It kind of hit me so bad, and it's something I really want to continue doing. I want to continue working with my community, finding any opportunities that connect me with everyone around and just connect everyone else to resources that may help them grow. And I also want to venture much into the power of connecting with the target communities. I know a lot of projects out there really are targeted to supporting maybe vulnerable communities, but it's always the original ideator imposing whatever they think the community wants, and less of them asking what the community actually needs. So tapping a lot into that and just being attentive on what I think the community needs versus what they actually need, from their own perspective.
My name is Auden White, and this summer I worked at a government relations firm named Keller Partners and Company in Washington, D.C. I was a government relations intern, and some of my responsibilities included taking notes, taking first drafts of government contracts and grants for municipalities, rural hospitals, and then also college institutions. Before the summer, I really didn't have any experience working with smaller private companies. A lot of my experience was with larger companies or in like smaller public spaces with nonprofits. Part of my experience with CHIDSI this summer was exploring the dynamics and relationships that exist within those, and how a lot of it's built on friendships and relationships that are built over many years in the sector. My bosses were both had been friends and had been professional colleagues for many years. And I'd not really experienced that dynamic before amongst the institutions that I've worked with and worked within. So one example of that is we had many like company dinners, and those transpired into other events outside of work. So we became really good friends, and then I was eventually invited as part of the team up to Saratoga Springs in New York the first week of school when we got back. So that just shows how relationships can last and are built and can last long beyond the summer, and how I'm still in contact with them right now, and the connections that grew a part of my CHIDSI grant. I think it sharpened me a lot better. I think I have a more clear understanding of what I want to do with my life. I think that comes with the work that I was able to do with Keller this summer, but then that also comes with the numerous networking opportunities that I was afforded as part of my CHIDSI experience, the opportunity to connect with so many different people across a very wide range of companies and topic areas and ideas. Really was instrumental in finding out, okay, I like this aspect of this institution, or I like this aspect of this job. How can I find that in something that I'm more aligned with, maybe characteristically, or like ideals and morals wise?
Hello, CHIDSI Leadership Foundation. This is Liam Anderson, and this is my video reflection on my experience this past summer interning with Carpenter Shelter in Alexandria, Virginia, and taking classes through Davidson in the Davidson and Washington program, so also in Washington, D.C. So a little bit about my experience. Carpenter Shelter is a nonprofit that operates, as I said, in Alexandria. It operates 2 shelters. I was stationed at one that was sort of more located centrally in the city called Hoffman Center. My official job title was Policy Research and Strategic Planning Intern, so that included a lot of fiscal analysis given the current state of the federal government, and so looking at HUD budget cuts, looking at human services cuts, looking at maybe SNAP food benefits cuts as an example, right? That's been Medicaid cuts, then also looking state level, okay, how does the state of Virginia operate? What are funding opportunities? And so a lot of that required a heavy amount of learning into the structures set in place for the shelter in the nonprofit to receive state and federal funding, understanding that sort of layer cake of where our funding comes from and proportionally what these cuts are going to implicate for the shelter's future, which was really interesting. And so I also did a lot of state policy research, looking at shifts in the current state landscape and the city of Alexandria as well. So connecting, I sort of tied all of those together and implemented them, working closely with the managing director into a potential sort of 3-year strategic plan and outlook. This included compiling a lot of interviews with professors and high-ranking nonprofit officials, asking them questions and reflecting on their answers, and then tying in my research into how that could inform a 3-year strategic plan for the shelter. So an example of one of the ideas we had was, okay, client retention at the shelter is not what we want it to be, i.e. we are seeing the same people who are on the streets, who we help, who we give housing, become unhoused once more at rates that are unprecedented. So looking at, okay, what are the common factors? Maybe addiction's a common factor. Maybe health-related issues are a common factor. Could we realistically partner up with another organization or independently open up a medical clinic in the shelter? And for me, then it's, okay, as a strategic planning intern, what does the funding look like? Is it possible? Who do we need to contact? Who do we need to work with? And so that was all very enriching. I also sat in on a ton of city meetings in the city of Alexandria, which included meetings with the mayor, but it also included meetings with other organizations, other nonprofits, other committees for human services. I drafted letters of support, and I also volunteered on my own accord at the courthouse doing eviction prevention outreach with the Legal Services of Northern Virginia. So I did a lot of learning this summer, and it was really interesting. But particularly in relation to the CHIDSI Leadership Program, one really relevant lesson that I learned was about leadership, and in specific from my immediate superior, the managing director. His name was Shannon Steen, and he was an absolute pro. I have never walked into an organization feeling so welcomed, so seen. Obviously, I'm an intern, right? So seen in many ways and valued, even though a naive undergraduate opinion is only worth so much. But genuinely, the way he ran the shelter and the nonprofit was brilliant. The people who worked there loved him. They loved the organization, and that you could tell that his enthusiasm and his authenticity really bred an environment that allowed the shelter to be so successful. I mean, unprecedentedly successful. And it was a really beautiful climate. People are always smiling. People are always happy. It's just a very positive workplace. And in turn, it was a very productive workplace, which is, I think it was a really beautiful thing to be in such a healthy and prospering environment in such an important industry, in such an important line of work. And so what I learned, I think, about leadership, the biggest one, and it ties right into CHIDSI, is that oftentimes, and not always, the best kind of leadership is very unconventional. And it shows up in really hidden ways and sort of the devil's in the details. Every morning, my boss I would walk into work, or he would walk into work while I was walking into work, and he would say hi to the person at the front desk, a volunteer who might volunteer once a month, and he knew their name, their kids' names, what their job was, everything. He knew everything about them. He knew what their last doctor's appointment was, right? And so that you could tell from him that he genuinely cared about his work, and he genuinely cared about the people who were taking their time to help fulfill the mission that he was so dedicated to fulfilling and providing service. And in turn, that created an environment that really was incredible. And so for me, I think when I imagine leadership, I imagine it as not necessarily someone who's imposing, someone who makes sure that they get their way always, or that they're the loudest voice in the room. And it's also not necessarily someone who needs to give everybody a voice, because that might lead to unproductive and, it might stagnate the actual operations of your organization. But instead, there's a difference between giving everybody a voice and making everybody feel seen and heard. And that was a really beautiful thing that I think my boss mastered, and something that I will continue to reflect on is just the different ways leadership can show up, and in turn, how it truly directly affects the entire organization. So, all in all, I had a great summer interning at Carpenter Shelter. It was incredibly enriching, and I learned so much. The Davidson in Washington program, I was able to get political science credits. I was able to take foreign policy in the Middle East with Dr. Protaska, which was a phenomenal course. I got immersive experiences, including visits to think tanks. We visited the Pentagon. I couldn't have had a better summer.
Hi, my name is Meher Hogarty, and this summer I worked as a clinical oncology trial data manager intern at the Southeastern Medical Oncology Center, or SMOC for short, in Goldsboro, North Carolina. So at the beginning of my experience, when I first started, my role was focused on understanding and managing data for active oncology clinical trials. I spent over 40 hours reading medical literature and trial procedures to learn how cancer studies are structured and approved. I became more fluent in medical and oncology terminology, and learned how to navigate patient EMRs, electronic medical records, so I could track their history. And he even got to attend a meeting where a new study was introduced to the principal investigator at my clinic, my boss, Dr. Kaspari. These experiences gave me a strong foundation in the technical and ethical sides of clinical research, which would help me lead into the next part of my project. Due to circumstances out of my control, my experience expanded beyond what I expected. and that's where I discovered actually the most about leadership this summer. While working on the trials, I began thinking about how my two academic interests, medicine and religion, might intersect. Because when I was talking to patients, it was very obvious to them that spirituality was an important part of their um, mental, emotional, and care process. And so I started thinking about how I could, do some research on that. So I developed the following question. To what extent do cancer patients believe that feeling spiritually or religiously fulfilled improves their emotional and mental well-being? So I pitched the idea of researching this to my boss, and he liked it, and he encouraged me to design and carry out a study. So I created a patient questionnaire, and then I built a system to track diagnostic information, survey data, and keep track of my personal notes and thoughts. I would speak with patients undergoing long treatments. So most patients are on chemotherapy or some kind of hydration for at least an hour to 2 hours each every week. So I would speak with them so as to not, they don't want to take up extra of their time or inhibit, provider care. But I spoke with them, asked them the questions, and then got to know them a little better. And these conversations were often deeply personal and emotional, and they would sometimes last up to an hour, and it gave me insight into the emotional side of cancer care, and something that is not captured, in the data set. So I was really happy to have that experience. Before this internship, I understood leadership as something, structured and formal. I thought about it as like guiding others through authority, direction, and organization. I kind of thought of leadership solely as being in charge of a team and making decisions that others would follow. However, during this project, I wasn't leading a team. I was kind of just directing myself. So my supervisor was out of the office for several weeks, and I was kind of responsible for running this study independently. I had to handle the patient interactions. I had to organize my own data and make daily decisions without direct oversight. So that taught me that leadership is not about managing others always. It's also about leading yourself through uncertainty, taking initiative, and being resourceful when there's no clear path. And through that, if you're able to do that for yourself, it will help you to do that better for other people later. Another shift in my understanding of leadership came through my relationships with the patients I was talking to. So I saw how much empathy and consistency mattered in clinical care. Like I said earlier, remembering small details about someone's life helped patients feel acknowledged and cared for, and that was really important for me and for them. So those small moments made a big difference for me. When a patient smiled because I remembered their name, I realized that leadership can mean also about just creating trust and comfort between you and another person. It's a lot about presence, showing up for others in a way that makes them feel seen. And that lesson changed how I think about leadership and about what kind of person I want to be in a leadership role. Looking back, the most challenging part of the summer was learning to adapt when things didn't go as planned. But that flexibility actually became the core of my growth this summer. While frustrating, I now see that leadership, it involves being open to change, listening closely to others, and finding meaning and progress in unexpected outcomes. The experience has also shaped how I want to impact society. I plan to write a paper comparing my findings with existing research on spirituality and well-being in cancer patients, and I would like to present it at a religious studies conference in the spring. Through this, I hope to bridge, my two areas of study and contribute to more holistic models of patient care. Ultimately, I've learned that leadership is not just about authority or control. It's about initiative, empathy, and adaptability. And making a meaningful difference often begins with something simple, just listening to others.
Hi, I'm Jordan Krajewski, and I used my summer immersion grant to do the Davidson in Cambridge program in Cambridge, England, at the University of Cambridge. As part of this program, you take one class on English and history in Britain from 1750 to 1850, where you're exposed to various themes such as the slave trade, women's rights, labor rights, the start of these movements and how they developed in Britain, and also the role of Britain as a colonial power and a global power. And outside of the class, you get time to travel, and it's actually really encouraged that you do travel to get the experience of being in Britain and to meet different people that live their lives different types of way. Prior to going on this experience, my thoughts of leadership were very focused on what I had experienced in life, and I've been around communities that are all a little bit different, but are also very similar, and I've been around the same communities most of my life. So even if they are a bit different, they are what I've grown up with, what I've known. So I knew that it was really important as a leader to understand the community that you're with. And in order to really be a good leader, you have to talk to your community. But I don't think I understood the gravity and the importance of that as clearly until I went on this trip, because using Chidsey Grant funds, I was able to really get to experience different parts of Britain and learn more about the cultural differences between England, Scotland, and Wales, and the cultural differences between big cities and small towns. And this is incredibly important. I learned that people in cities run their lives incredibly differently and that they value different things. And just like London is a much faster paced city than Wrexham is in Wales. And so it would be very important as a leader to recognize that and understand that maybe people in London are more concerned with how the underground is running, because they need to be able to get from point A to point B in that fast pace, and they have time that they have to get there. Whereas sitting down in a pub and talking to people in Wrexham is much more common. And these experiences highlighted to me the importance of recognizing and understanding the community that you're with in order to be able to serve them as a leader. One of the other things that I learned on this trip was a lot more about the work that's being done currently in England specifically, but is part of a broader trend of looking back at history and reanalyzing what we know and digging deeper into what we know. So to experience this, we went, as part of our class, we talked about the slave trade, slavery, the abolition movement in England, and as part of that, we got to go to a museum to hear from a curator who's been working on this very project. And one of the things that I learned is how some of this has been glossed over. So of course, when I've gone to museums before, I've seen that stuff is missing from my own research. I know that stuff is missing from museums, but what I saw was people taking initiative and taking a step forward, because given the world that we're in, we're starting to lose this information about minority groups that have been left out of the common historical narrative. And as someone very interested in that and interested in pursuing a career in human rights, it's very important to me to highlight those narratives and truly understand them. So something that I learned that I think has really impacted the way that I want to approach my future career in the world is the priority on listening to minority voices and listening to the voices that are maybe outside the common narrative to hear what they have to say. Because these are voices, especially in the field of human rights, of people that need help that aren't being heard. And so they're not receiving the help that they need and that they deserve and that they are legally allowed to receive. And it's important to me in my future career that I'm able to help those people by listening. And I think that is perhaps the single most important thing that I've gained from this trip, because as a museum curator on historical documents, our speaker didn't have access to these people to talk to them about their experiences, but she had access to memoirs and to records, and those speak 1,000 words. And the work that she was doing in really understanding what people were writing highlighted to me the importance of actually listening to something, and just, you don't have to have a response back, but as a leader to sit and listen to the experiences of your community and think about them before you act is essential.
Hello, my name is Romeo Norris. I am a political science and East Asian studies double major at Davidson College, And for my summer immersion experience, I had the wonderful opportunity here in the illustrious New Zealand to work under my supervisor, Ricardo Mendes March, who is an MP for the Green Party at the Green Party of New Zealand. So, as an intern slash volunteer, my primary role was to do investigative research using the Right to Information Act to compile questions that I could then send to the government that will be answered in a timely manner. And through that, I compiled the data into reports using data analysis techniques along with data visualizations to ensure that the data was readable to the Green Party, and then also as well pose new questions to the government that is currently sitting right now. So while I was in this position, I think the main way I kind of saw leadership before this, especially within government, was that you have to be very poignant with what you want done objective-wise. You have to be very specific, very... How can I describe this? You have to be very demand-driven when it comes to the ways in which you kind of interact with people, and then also how you advocate for them. And I think within my position, and then also working very closely with my supervisor, I was quite surprised when I first met him. He was very down to earth, very willing to help me understand what was going on when it came to lodging these questions in the parliament. And given that my topic was overstayers' visas and the demographics of those overstayers, it was pretty data heavy, pretty data driven. And with that, I had to overcome a lot of barriers, but I think his patience with me throughout the whole entire process, and then also as well his willingness to meet with me every month, and then also as well to have check-ins, kind of guide me into making these reports. It made me realize that through leadership, even when it comes to being specifically in government, you do not have to be domineering in order to get things done. And if anything, centering humanity, centering kindness is actually more productive than having to take a more abrasive role in trying to lead. And I think with that, my prior understanding of leadership beforehand wasn't necessarily that I had to be of that such a role, but rather that within leadership, especially when you go higher up in, I guess, affluence when it comes to influencing individuals, but then also as well making changes for them, I thought you had to be a lot more direct, to be a lot more poignant with what you wanted to get done. But I think in being under Ricardo Mendes March, my understanding that honestly fundamentally changed, because with him being such a down-to-earth person, but then also finding ways to advocate for people in a way in which they can also advocate for themselves as well, that role was honestly monumental to the way in which I think about advocacy and then also leadership in politics. Given that the United States, specifically in comparison to New Zealand, is a little bit more partisan when it comes to, I guess, the ways in which we are represented, but then also how we kind of understand politics in general, seeing a mixed member parliament with 6 parties and also as well other representation outside the 6 parties as well that have seats, it was very interesting in which you could see the ways in which representation were actually prioritized compared to the United States system. And with that, it was honestly very eye-opening to see that there is so much that we can do as people to, for example, like I was doing, the function is available to everyone. But at the same exact time, under the guidance of the Green Party, I was able to lodge those questions over understay visas, and then also as well to work with my supervisor to ensure that the data that we were collecting was viable and then also necessary for the questions that we were asking. So with that being the case, I think the ways in which my leadership has changed fundamentally is that I've further understood that you do not have to be the person talking loudest in the room. You do not have to be the person who just wants to get things done. You can work with people in a way that's not just surface level. It's making sure you are uplifting voices and being the backbone to their struggles and making sure that they're heard and voiced in a room in which the people that are listening to them will have to make the change, because representation honestly is key. And in that, I learned that in government, you don't have to be voiceless. And I think that was the thing, even as me, for example, as a foreigner, the access was honestly quite insane compared to the United States. So I would honestly say the primary difference is that I felt as if the agency that I have as a leader is so much higher than I thought it was. So through this experience, I had the opportunity to go to Wellington, meet all the MPs in the Green Party, and then also see the Prime Minister in person. It was quite honestly very interesting. But I think in that, I think the ways in which I kind of understood the way in which I could impact society better was that within all the conversations I had with the MPs, the one thing that I've realized in having this conversation is that they did not have to sacrifice who they were as people to be in politics. If anything, they were just themselves, but if honestly, in their purest version. Because of the fact that I learned through this experience and also people I was working closely with, that you don't have to sacrifice your personhood to be a leader. And I think the humanity in being a leader is so important because instead of, I guess, having to see leadership as a stereotypical leader of a group, like for example, just having to just be direct, get things done, and then kind of be abrasive in that sense, the styles of leadership are so much more valuable than I think I honestly really thought myself. And with that being a factor, I realized that in the conversations I had as well, the people that I was speaking with, they were so down to earth. And me, for example, being from a different country but working with this government pretty closely, I realized that in being a leader, you do not have to sacrifice your soft edges or your humanity as a person. You can uplift the voices of the people around you and the people that you care about. And you don't really have to be this headstrong person who's, I guess, trying to lead a group by forcing this change. You don't really have to be. You can do it amongst the people. And I think that was the most valuable thing I learned through this. And in this, the ways in which I want to make an impact on society, I realized I don't have to sacrifice my soft edges to be a good leader. I don't have to put on this persona or I have to act as if I'm something I'm not to be a leader. And I think given that I'm already a pretty soft-spoken person, I'm a pretty quieter side person, I realized that does not have to change. If anything, that's actually better because at the end of the day, I do not have to be someone who I'm not. And instead of working against my natural characteristics and traits, I can work with them. And if anything, presence is the most important part of being a leader. And even when I was looking into the things that I was looking into as an intern, a lot of the MPs that I saw were at rallies every weekend, and they were just being there with the people, influencing change, and then also hearing their voices and bringing those concerns up with the government who is currently sitting. And with that, it made it really accessible to just kind of be able to just talk to them because they're, at the end of the day, we're normal people too. They were just representing the voices of the people which they represented. So that honestly was the most mind-blowing thing to me because I think in my understanding of government, growing up in Southern Maryland, being next to DC all the time, and seeing all these buildings that were so large, even to this point they still are, but there always felt as if there was a disconnect between what was happening inside of them and what was happening outside of them. And I think what I realized is that does not really have to be. The people that we elect into our government should be representative of us, and they shouldn't have to feel as if they have to represent this larger cause than the people themselves. And I think in that, it made it, in my eyes, that leadership was a lot more personal than I kind of expected to be, especially in governmental spaces. So I think the ways in which I want to impact society directly is that bringing myself to the table is the most valuable thing that I can do. Thank you, Mr. and Mrs. Chitsey.
A big thank you to the Chidsey family for this experience. It was absolutely incredible. I have learned so much as an individual and as a leader, and it was just an incredible experience overall. So thank you, Chidsey family.
I would like to take this time to thank John and Lisa Chidsey and the whole Chidsey family for enabling me to have this this experience this summer. It was truly a wonderful experience, and I couldn't have done it without their support. So thank you.
And I couldn't have had a better summer. And John and Lisa, I have you to thank. So thank you so much. I am eternally grateful, and I look forward to the rest of the Chidsey Leadership Program. Take care. Bye.
I'd like to extend a lot of gratitude to John and Lisa Chidsey. Without them and their support through the Chidsey Leadership Fellows Program, my summer would have looked very, very different.
I just want to say a very big thank you to John and Lisa for supporting the Chidsey program, but also especially the Immersion grant. It wouldn't have been possible without your support. Thank you so much.
Thank you to the Chidzi family for giving me this life-changing opportunity that allowed me to incorporate what I had learned and finding new ways to solve.
Thank you, John and Lisa.
Thank you, John and Lisa Chidzi, for this opportunity. This is an opportunity that I couldn't have said yes to without your support. And the things I've taken from it, not only like, you know, these more educational findings, but also just the human relationships that I've taken from it are really special to me. And so I'm so thankful for your support. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lisa and John, for this opportunity.
Thank you, Chidzi family.
Thank you, Mr. and Mrs. Chidzi, for all of your support.
Thank you, Chidzi family, for the amazing experience.
Thank you so much, the Chidzi family, for this experience, and thank you to Nadia and Caitlin for helping me through the grant application process and really figuring out what I could even do with this amazing opportunity.
I was thinking recently about how leadership works in a space like City or in a space like any big corporate culture. And I think it's almost akin to a flywheel, right? People develop good leadership skill sets. They help develop more leaders underneath them, and then those people develop the skills or the Clifton strengths that help them become good leaders. That cycle will continuously repeat. But in a culture that is often begrudging to change, like banking, where Chidzi sits is giving opportunities to those who may not have it, or filling the gap where leadership knowledge doesn't exist. To keep this flywheel running, to change the yarn, you may say, that's the core of the Chidzi Leadership Program to me, and why I'm so grateful to be a part of it. I want to thank both John and Lisa Chidzi for this opportunity of being here the last 3 years. It has been incredible to develop in a group such as the Chidzi Leadership Program. You've chosen great heads to lead it, and to hear you, John, speak the last 2 years has been a real high point in our semester.